I bought the oceanfront house to disappear, not to become someone's free resort. One call shattered that dream. My son-in-law announced he was arriving with 15 people, claiming my bedroom, my food, and my time like I owed him my life. I didn't argue. I didn't warn him. I let them walk in believing they'd won. Because what they didn't know was this. Every step they took inside my home was setting off a plan that would end with sirens, consequences, and a truth they could never undo. Before I take you through how that single call shattered my idea of peace, take a second, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps stories like this reach the people who need to hear them. The phone rang sharp and sudden, slicing through the quiet like a blade against glass. I'd been standing barefoot in the kitchen of my new oceanfront villa, carefully peeling protective paper from a crystal wine glass, admiring how the afternoon sun bent itself into rainbows across the counter. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Atlantic stretched wide and endless, waves folding into one another in a rhythm I'd waited 40 years to hear in silence. "Hello," I answered, already smiling, expecting maybe an old colleague call and congratulate me on retirement. "Hey, old man," Brian said. No greeting. No pause. "We're on the road already. There'll be 15 of us. Get beds ready. Towels, slippers, food. We're staying 3 weeks. We'll be there in about 40 minutes, so move fast." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, gripping the edge of the counter. "We're coming to your place," he repeated, irritated now. Jessica packed everything. Mike and Ashley are bringing their friends. "You got the space, right?" That's what having money is for. The word money landed heavier than any insult. 40 years of engineering work. Overtime shifts. Missed vacations. Delayed dreams. Every careful dollar saved so I could finally sit somewhere beautiful and hear nothing but the sea. "Brian," I said slowly, "I just bought this house. I'm not set up for guests. I still have boxes everywhere." "I don't care," he snapped. "You're retired. What else do you have going on?" "Figured out." I closed my eyes. The ocean breeze carried in through the open doors, smelling of salt and freedom, and his voice poisoned it instantly. 3 weeks is a long time," I said, "and 15 people." "We're family," he cut in, laughing. "Family helps family. You taught me that, remember? And don't start acting stingy now. What's the point of all that success if you don't share it?" "Share it." I saw my daughter's face in my mind. Emily, gone 3 years now. Cancer, gentle, always asking me to be patient with her husband, to understand him, to help just a little longer. Jessica wants the master bedroom, Brian added casually. Best view, right? She needs it for her morning videos. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles burned. "That's my bedroom," I said. "Relax," he replied. "We'll be there in 35 now. Don't make us wait outside." The line went dead. I stood there in silence, the phone heavy in my hand, the glass counter cold beneath my fingers. Outside, seagulls wheeled over the surf, ignorant of the invasion already in motion. 35 minutes. 15 people. 3 weeks. I hadn't even slept one full night in the house yet. I set the phone down slowly and walked into the living room. Boxes were stacked along the walls. Furniture still wrapped. Paintings waiting to be hung. My life paused between effort and reward. Emily's photo sat alone on the mantel, the first thing I'd unpacked. I picked it up and sank into the leather chair facing the ocean. "Dad," Brian's trying. Her voice echoed in my memory. "He just needs help getting on his feet." Help. That word had cost me more than I'd ever admit out loud. The first time was after their wedding. His startup failed. $18,000 gone overnight. Then tuition for his MBA. $45,000. Then the down payment for their house when his credit couldn't carry them. $60,000 more. And when Emily got sick, there was no hesitation. $85,000 for treatments, specialists, anything that might buy her time. But even then, Brian complained. About stress. About inconvenience. About how hard his life was. After Emily died, I thought it would stop. It didn't. It escalated. Car repairs. Tax problems. Lifestyle upgrades. Each crisis framed as temporary. Each promise to repay, quietly forgotten. Over 6 years, nearly $300,000 flowed out my accounts and into his life. And now, he was bringing 15 people into my home without asking. The distant growl of engines pulled me back to the present. I stood and walked to the window. Dust rose along the private road leading up to property. 4 vehicles, maybe 5. A convoy. My heart didn't race. It hardened. This wasn't a visit. It was a takeover. As the cars rolled into my circular drive and doors slammed open, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not fear, clarity. I walked the front door and opened it before anyone could knock. Brian strode in first, sunglasses on, confidence dripping from every step. "What's up?" he said, already scanning the house. "Damn, this place is nicer than I imagined." Behind him came Jessica, phone raised, recording. "Oh my God, guys, look at this view." Then more bodies, luggage, coolers, strangers laughing like they owned the place. I stood in my own foyer, invisible. And that's when I understood something I should have realized years earlier. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as infrastructure. And infrastructure exists to be used. They didn't slow down when they entered. They spread. Bags at the floor. Shoes came off wherever people felt like kicking them. Someone dragged a cooler across my marble tiles, leaving a thin scratch I noticed instantly and knew I'd never forget. Music started somewhere near the living room. Loud, bass-heavy, completely out of place against the steady hush of the ocean outside. Brian moved to the house like a landlord inspecting a property he already believed was his. He opened doors without asking, peeked into rooms, whistled low when he saw the view from the study. "Man," he said to no one in particular, "you really went all out." Jessica was already live streaming. I could hear her voice echoing down the hall, syrupy and excited. "Guys, this is my father-in-law's new place. Can you believe this view? We're here for a few weeks to just relax and reconnect as a family." Reconnect. I stood near the entryway, watching strangers claim my space like it was a vacation rental with no host present. A man I barely recognized, Mike, I thought, popped open a beer without asking. Another woman I'd never met leaned against my kitchen island and asked where I kept the extra towels. A child ran past me, wet feet slapping against the floor, leaving dark prints behind. "Brian," I said, raising my voice for the first time, "we need to talk. Now." He glanced at me like I'd interrupted something unimportant. "Later. Let everyone get settled." "No," I said. "Now." He sighed, exaggerated, then stepped closer. "Relax. You're acting overwhelmed. Moving does that to people your age." Something sharp twisted in my chest. Not pain, but recognition. This was how it always went. Dismiss. Minimize. Redirect. "I told you on the phone this wasn't okay." I said. "You can't just bring 15 people into my house." "Our house," he corrected casually. "Family house." Before I could respond, Jessica's voice rang out from the hallway. "Oh my God, Brian, this bedroom is perfect. The light is insane in here." My stomach dropped. I moved down the hall quickly and stopped cold in the doorway of my master bedroom. Jessica stood in the middle of the room with her suitcase open on my bed. My bed, clothes already spread across the quilt I'd chosen carefully after months of planning. Emily's framed photo, the one I'd placed on the nightstand, had been moved aside, resting face down near the lamp. "What are you doing?" I asked. She turned, startled, then smiled like this was all a misunderstanding. "Oh, hi. We're just settling in. Brian said this room was ours." "No," I said. "This is my bedroom." She laughed lightly. "Come on. You don't need the big one. You're here alone." The words landed harder than she knew. Brian appeared behind her, arms crossed, already irritated. "Don't start this. We've been driving for hours. Jessica needs space for her morning routine. You can use one of the guest rooms." I stared at him. Really stared. "You didn't ask," I said quietly. "You didn't even give me the chance to say yes." He scoffed. "Because you would have said no. That should tell you something." Jessica zipped her suitcase halfway, her smile tightening. Why are you being like this? We thought you'd be happy to have company. Company? 15 people. 3 weeks. No notice. No consent. I want everyone to leave, I said. The room went silent. Brian blinked. What? I want everyone to leave. I repeated, louder this time. Now. Jessica's face shifted instantly, hurt, confused, offended. Are you serious right now? Yes. Brian laughed, but there was no humor in it. You can't be serious. I am. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Think about what you're saying. You're kicking out family. You brought strangers into my home, I said. You claimed my bedroom. You didn't ask. You ordered. From behind us, voices gathered. People sense conflict the way animals sense weather. Mike leaned into the hallway, beer still in hand. Everything cool? He asked. No, Brian snapped. It's not. Jessica turned to the growing audience, eyes already glassy. I can't believe this. We came all this way. You came without permission, I said. Brian's jaw tightened. You owe us. The word stunned me. I owe you. I repeated. Everything we have, you help with, he said. You don't get to pull the rug out now. Emily would never have allowed this. That name, used like a weapon, hit something raw. Don't, I said. Don't use my daughter to justify your behavior. She was your daughter. He shot back. She was my wife, and she wanted us taken care of. She wanted kindness. I said, not exploitation. Jessica stepped forward, lowering her voice into something coaxing. Rick, honey, let's not make this dramatic. We'll clean up. We'll stay out of your way. It'll be fun. Fun. I looked past her at my room, my sanctuary, my rest, my grief, and my future tangled together on that bed. No, I said. Brian's expression hardened. You're really doing this? Yes. You'll regret it. Maybe, I said, but not today. His voice dropped. Some things can't be undone. I nodded. You're right. I turned and walked away from them, down the hall, past the living room full of people who had already started packing assumptions into my walls. I went into my study and closed the door, locked it. The sound of the click echoed louder than the music ever had. Inside, the room was still. Bookshelves, my desk, the ocean framed perfectly through the window. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. What's your emergency? There are people in my home who refuse to leave. I said, I am the homeowner. Outside the door, voices rose. What's he doing? Someone asked. Probably bluffing. Brian said loudly. He won't actually do anything. The operator asked questions. I answered calmly. Ownership, address, number of individuals. 15. The pounding on the door started. Open up. Brian yelled. This is family business. I stayed seated. Jessica's voice followed, syrupy again. Rick, please. Don't do this. Think about how this looks. I already knew how it looked. It looked like the end of something that should have ended years ago. The operator told me officers were on the way. I thanked her and ended the call. Outside, the voices shifted from confident to nervous. Someone whispered that they should leave. Someone else said Brian would handle it. Brian always thought he could handle things. Sirens cut through the air 15 minutes later, slicing clean through entitlement. The house fell quiet. I stood and unlocked the door. When I stepped back into my living room, the group had rearranged themselves like actors waiting for direction. Brian stood near the front, ready to speak. Jessica sat on the couch, eyes red, tissues in hand. The officers entered. Sir, one of them said, looking at me, are you the homeowner? Yes. And you've asked these individuals to leave? Yes. The officer turned to Brian. Sir, family relationship does not override property rights. You'll need to vacate. Jessica gasped. But we're family. Ma'am, the officer said evenly, you are guests without permission. The word guests finally broke something. The scramble began. People grabbed bags. Coolers were hauled out. Apologies surfaced where confidence once lived. Brian stood frozen, staring at me like I betrayed him. "You didn't have to go this far," he said quietly. "I didn't go far enough soon enough," I replied. As the last car pulled away, the house exhaled. Silence returned. But I knew, standing there alone, looking at the mess they'd left behind, that this wasn't over. Because when people lose access, they don't always accept it. Sometimes they come back louder. And Brian had never been good at losing. The house felt bruised after they left. Not broken, just violated in a way that lingered. Like someone had walked through your memories with muddy shoes and laughed while doing it. I moved slowly, room by room, collecting evidence of their assumption. Empty bottles on the counter. Sand ground into the rug I'd ordered from Italy. A wet towel abandoned on a chair that had never known moisture before. In the master bathroom, makeup smears stained the marble vanity, like fingerprints at crime scene. I stopped in my bedroom last. The bed was rumpled. My sheets, fresh and used, creased and disturbed. Emily's photo sat crooked on the nightstand. The glass cracked at one corner. That did it. I sat on the edge of the bed and held the frame in both hands, thumbs brushing over the crack. It felt symbolic in a way that made my chest tighten. Nothing destroyed beyond repair, but nothing untouched either. I didn't cry. I cleaned. There's a kind of control that comes from restoring order after chaos. Every bottle tossed into the recycling bin felt like reclaiming ground. Every towel folded, every surface wiped. Every chair returned to its place gave me back something they tried to take without asking. By nightfall, the villa was quiet again. Too quiet. I poured a drink and sat on the deck, watching the ocean darken into a heavy, endless blue. The waves rolled in, indifferent to entitlement, to family drama, to manipulation. They crashed, retreated, returned, honest and predictable. My phone buzzed, then buzzed again. I didn't look at it. By the third vibration, I knew who it was. Brian. I finished my drink before picking it up. 23 missed calls. Dozens of texts. The first few were confusion. What just happened? We need to talk. Then anger. You embarrassed us. You had no right. Then threat. You think this is over? The last message chilled me. Everyone will hear about this. I turned the phone face down. I slept poorly that night. Not because I regretted my decision, but because I knew Brian well enough to understand that he never lost quietly. When he couldn't control the situation directly, he reshaped the story until he looked like the victim and everyone else looked cruel. Morning confirmed it. I woke to notifications lighting up my screen like fireworks. Messages from old neighbors, former colleagues, even people I hadn't spoken to since Emily's funeral. Is everything okay? I saw Brian's post. I didn't know you were like that. My stomach sank. I opened Facebook. Brian's post sat at the top of my feed, already shared dozens of times. He'd written it carefully. I could almost hear his voice as I read. I never thought I'd have to write something like this. Yesterday, my family and I were kicked out of my father-in-law's home. He called the police on us like we were criminals. All we wanted was to spend time together after years of loss. Money really does change people. Emily would be heartbroken. My chest tightened. Emily's name again. Used like a shield. The comments were worse. That's awful. How could he do that to family? Some people value money more than love. Jessica had posted too. A video. Red eyes. Soft voice. I just don't understand how someone can turn so cold. We brought friends to meet him, to celebrate his success. And he treated us like intruders. Intruders. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. By noon, the story had grown legs. People filled in details Brian never mentioned. 15 people became a few close friends. 3 weeks became a weekend visit. My refusal became cruelty. I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Defending yourself online never works the way you hope. Facts drown in emotion. Explanations look like excuses. And Brian was far better at manipulating sentiment than I'd ever be. I shut the laptop and walked back onto the deck. The ocean didn't care. That's when I remembered something Brian had forgotten. I keep records. 40 years as an engineer teaches you a few habits. One of them is documentation. Another is never trusting memory when numbers matter. I went into my study and opened the filing cabinet I hadn't touched since Emily passed. Inside were folders I'd labeled carefully over the years. Family assistance. I pulled it out. Checks, wire transfers, bank statements, notes scribbled in the margins reminding me why each payment was sent. MBA tuition, mortgage help, medical bills, emergency funds that never got repaid. I spread them across the desk in chronological order. The total stopped me cold, just under $300,000. I sat back, staring at the number. Brian's post painted him as abandoned. These documents painted him as supported, consistently, quietly, without conditions, for years. I opened my laptop again, but this time not to argue, to prepare. I scanned documents, took screenshots, cross-referenced dates with Brian's old post complaining about money while I was wiring funds his account. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Public struggle, private support. I called my attorney. Howard answered on the second ring. "Richard," he said, surprised. "Everything all right?" "No," I said, "but it's about to be." I explained everything. The invasion, the police, the posts. Howard listened without interrupting. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "You did the right thing calling the police," he said, "and you were right to call me. This is moving toward defamation." "I don't want revenge," I said. "I just want the truth." "The truth," he replied, "is exactly what we'll use." We scheduled a meeting for Monday. After the call, I returned to my desk and kept working. Brian thought this was a social media fight. He didn't realize he'd picked a battle with someone who solved problems for a living. By evening, I had a clean timeline. Every dollar, every promise, every contradiction. I saved everything in multiple places. Backups, redundancy. Another habit. As the sun sank into the ocean, my phone buzzed again. A message from Brian. "Take the post down and apologize. We can fix this." I didn't respond, because for the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was planning, and Brian had no idea what was coming next. Monday morning arrived without ceremony, but I felt different waking up. Lighter, focused. The panic that usually followed confrontation was gone, replaced by something steadier. Resolve. I dressed carefully, not for appearance, but for intention. A clean shirt, pressed slacks, the same leather shoes I'd worn to project reviews and board meetings for decades. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see an angry old man or a defeated one. I saw someone who had finally stopped apologizing for existing. Howard's office sat downtown, quiet and efficient, the kind of place where problems were taken seriously and solved methodically. When I laid the folder on his desk, he didn't smile. He leaned forward. "Let's go through this," he said. We did, line by line, year by year. Howard circled numbers with his pen. MBA tuition, wedding expenses, mortgage assistance, medical bills during Emily's treatment, emergency transfers that had become routine. "This isn't generosity," he said finally. "This is dependency." I nodded. I didn't see it while Emily was alive. "Grief blurs lines," he said gently. "People who know how to exploit that tend to move fast." He leaned back in his chair. Brian's posts create exposure, false statements that damage your reputation. And given your age and the pattern of transfers, there's a credible argument for financial exploitation. The word landed heavily. "I don't want him destroyed," I said. "I want him stopped." Howard nodded. "That's reasonable and legally achievable." We discussed options. Formal demand letter, defamation notice, recovery of funds under unjust enrichment, injunctions to prevent further harassment. "This ends one of two ways," Howard said. "Privately, with retractions and repayment, or publicly in court." "Let him choose," I said. Howard smiled thinly. "I suspected you'd say that." By noon, the first letter was drafted. Calm, precise, impossible to misinterpret. It outlined the false statements Brian had made, included evidence, attached financial documentation. It demanded three things: immediate removal of defamatory posts, a public correction acknowledging incomplete and misleading claims, good faith discussions toward repayment. Brian had 72 hours. When I left Howard's office, my phone rang. Brian. I let it go to voicemail. The message came seconds later. Richard, what are you doing? Why did my lawyer just call me? I didn't respond. By evening, the online tone had shifted. Brian's supporters were starting to ask questions. Someone had shared screenshots of bank transfers I'd posted. Not angrily, just factually. I didn't know you'd given them that much. Why didn't Brian mention this? Jessica posted again, defensive this time. Money doesn't excuse cruelty. I almost laughed. The next day, Brian's post disappeared. Not deleted, edited. Comments turned off. That told me everything. He was scrambling. That night, I found an envelope taped to my gate. No stamp. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. You're tearing this family apart. Emily would never forgive you. I stood there for a long time, ocean wind pressing against my back. Emily, I said aloud to dark. Would you? Her answer lived in quiet. No guilt, no shame, just truth. The next morning, Brian showed up. Alone. I saw his car from the kitchen window. No convoy this time. No audience. He rang the bell. I didn't rush. When I opened the door, he looked smaller somehow. Tired. Defensive. We need to talk, he said. I told you. I replied calmly. All communication goes through my attorney. He scoffed. You're really doing this? Lawsuits? Letters? You started this publicly. I said, I'm finishing it properly. His jaw tightened. You blindsided us. You invaded my home. You called the police. You refused to leave. He ran a hand through his hair. We're family. Family doesn't threaten, I said. Family doesn't lie. Silence stretched between us. I can take the post down, he said finally. But the money is documented. I replied, and now so are your threats. His eyes flicked up sharply. I kept everything. I continued. Texts, voicemails, the note you left. That startled him. You left a note? He said, then stopped himself. I said nothing. Look, he said, lowering his voice. You don't want this turning ugly. I met his gaze steadily. Brian, this already did. You just didn't expect to be on the wrong side of it. He stared at me for a long moment, then laughed softly. You always were too careful, he said. Too precise. And you always mistook that for weakness. I replied. He stepped back. I'll talk to my lawyer, he muttered. I already have, I said. When he drove away, I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. But I also knew this wasn't the end yet. People like Brian don't give up control easily. They just change tactics. And somewhere I was certain he was already planning his next move. The next week unfolded like a slow-burning aftershock. Brian didn't post again, not publicly. That silence spoke louder than any rant. People who thrive on attention rarely go quiet unless they're regrouping. And Brian was always good at regrouping. What he did instead was subtler. Private messages started reaching me from people I barely knew. Friends of friends. Distant relatives. Former coworkers. Not hostile, concerned. Richard, I hope you're okay. Brian says you're under a lot of stress. He's worried about you. Says you're pushing everyone away. If you need help, don't be afraid to ask. I recognize the tactic immediately. Concern trolling. Paint the target as unstable. Fragile. Confused. If I was unwell, then his lies weren't lies. They were explanations. I forwarded every message to Howard. Good, he said. This strengthens a pattern. Meanwhile, Brian's lawyer finally reached out. Polite, controlled, carefully vague. They proposed mediation. No admission of wrongdoing. No repayment, just moving forward as a family. Howard read the email twice, then looked at me over his glasses. This is stalling, he said. He's hoping pressure wears you down. It won't, I replied. Howard nodded. Then we escalate. By Friday, formal filings were in motion. Defamation, harassment, financial recovery under unjust enrichment. Paperwork moved faster than emotions ever had. That weekend, I stayed home. Not hiding, grounding. I walked the beach early each morning. Let the cold water numb my ankles. Let the horizon remind me how small this all really was. On Sunday afternoon, I received a call from someone I hadn't expected. Margaret, Emily's closest friend from college. I owe you an apology, she said as soon as I answered. I listened quietly as she explained how Brian had called her personally, how he cried, how he'd told her I'd changed after Emily died. But then I saw the documents, she said softly. The transfers, the dates. Richard, I didn't know. It's all right, I said, and I meant it. No, she insisted. It's not. Emily trusted you, and I should have too. After we hung up, I sat for a long time staring at Emily's photo. That call mattered more than any online apology, because Brian's narrative depended on isolating me. And isolation only works when people stay silent. Monday morning brought a development Brian hadn't anticipated. A reporter called. Local outlet. Human interest angle. I'm working on a follow-up, she said. And I've reviewed both sides. Both sides. That was new. She asked factual questions. Requested documentation. Asked for comment on the legal filings. I won't discuss active litigation, I said carefully, but the public record speaks for itself. She thanked me. That afternoon, the article went live. It wasn't flattering to either of us, but it was accurate. It mentioned the police report, the financial support, the contradictory social media claims. Brian wasn't a villain, but he wasn't a victim either. By evening, his phone calls resumed, this time frantic. This is getting out of control, he said when I finally answered. My work is asking questions. Sponsors pulled out. You made it public. I replied, I made it factual. You could have stopped this. So could you, I said. Silence. Then quieter, what do you want? The question felt different this time. Less threatening. More desperate. I want peace, I said. And accountability. He laughed bitterly. You want blood. No, I said. I want boundaries. We ended the call without resolution. But I noticed something important. For the first time, Brian wasn't speaking from power. He was reacting. And that meant the balance had shifted. That night, I slept deeply. Not because everything was resolved, but because I was no longer carrying it alone. Truth has weight, and once released, it doesn't return quietly to the shadows. It keeps moving. The shift didn't happen all at once. It crept in, quiet and unmistakable, like a tide turning while everyone was still arguing about the weather. Brian's confidence cracked first. It showed in the way he spoke when he finally agreed to meet at his lawyer's office. Not mine. Neutral ground. Controlled lighting. Witnesses. He arrived late, eyes darting, jaw tight, carrying none of the swagger he'd worn so easily in my living room just weeks earlier. Jessica wasn't with him. That absence mattered. Howard and I sat across the polished conference table while Brian fidgeted with his phone, tapping the screen like it might offer escape. His attorney, younger than Howard and visibly outmatched, cleared his throat. Let's try to keep this constructive, he said. Everyone here wants resolution. Howard slid a folder across the table without a word. Bank records. Certified. Labeled. Indexed. Brian didn't open it at first. He stared at the cover like it might bite him. You didn't have to do this, Brian muttered. Howard leaned forward. Actually, he did. Your public statements forced his hand. Brian finally opened the folder. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. His face drained of color with every turn. You kept all this? He asked, disbelief cracking through his voice. I told you, I said calmly. I'd document everything. He swallowed. You could have talked to me. I tried, I replied. You told me to hurry up and prepare towels. Jessica's name came up then, unprompted. She pushed me. Brian said suddenly, like a confession slipped out by accident. The posts. The pressure. She said, if I didn't control the story, you would. Howard's pen paused. That's interesting, he said mildly, because Ms. Miller is not named in this filing yet. Brian stiffened. I didn't say that, he said quickly. Howard smiled thinly. You did. The meeting ended without signatures. But something important happened before we left. Brian asked quietly, what happens if I don't settle? Howard didn't hesitate. Discovery, he said. Full financial disclosure. Subpoenas. Employer involvement. And a public record you won't control. Brian nodded slowly. For the first time, fear outweighed arrogance. Outside the office, Brian caught up to me in the parking lot. Richard, he said, please. I stopped but didn't turn. You used Emily, I said, over and over. He flinched. That was a line you shouldn't have crossed. I continued. Everything after that was inevitable. He stood there as I walked away. That night, the messages changed again. Not angry, not threatening, begging. Brian sent voice notes instead of texts. Long ones. He talked about pressure, about money, about how Jessica expected a certain life, about how it all spiraled. I listened to none of them. I forwarded them to Howard, because intentions don't erase actions, and explanations don't undo harm. 2 days later, Jessica posted again, not crying this time, angry. She didn't name me, but everyone knew. Some people would rather sue family than admit they're wrong. Money over morals, lawyers over love. The comments were split, but something had changed. People ask questions now. Didn't he give you money for years? Why wasn't that mentioned before? Why did you bring 15 people without asking? Jessica disabled comments within an hour. Her silence lasted 3 days. Then she broke it with a mistake. She posted a photo. Designer handbag. New. Price tag visible in the mirror reflection. 2 hours later, Brian deleted it. Too late. Screenshots live forever. Howard called me that evening. That photo undermines their hardship narrative, he said. Perfectly timed. I didn't plan it, I said. I know, he replied, which makes it better. By the end of the week, Brian's attorney requested another meeting. This time, the tone was different. They brought an offer. Partial repayment. Structured. Public retraction. Howard reviewed it carefully. It's a start, he said, but not enough. Brian's lawyer sighed. This is everything he can manage. That's not my concern, Howard replied. The harm was not limited to finances. Brian finally looked at me directly. What do you want from me? He asked. Exhaustion etched deep into his face. I answered without hesitation. I want you to stop telling people I abandoned you, I said. I want you to acknowledge publicly that I supported you substantially, and I want you to respect my boundaries going forward. And the money is secondary, I said, but it will be addressed. Brian nodded slowly. Jessica refused to attend the meeting. That refusal spoke volumes. Over the next 2 weeks, things unraveled quietly. Brian's workplace reassigned him. Not fired, but sidelined, until things settled. Sponsors distanced themselves. Friends stopped calling. The same people who had flooded my inbox with concern now sent awkward apologies. I didn't know the full story. He didn't mention the money. I'm sorry I judged too quickly. I accepted most of them, not because they deserved forgiveness, but because holding on to resentment felt like carrying someone else's luggage long after they'd left the airport. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the water, I received a message from someone unexpected. Jessica's sister. I'm sorry, she wrote. I tried to warn Brian. This got out of hand. I didn't reply. Some apologies are meant to ease the sender, not the recipient. A week later, the settlement was finalized. No courtroom, no spectacle. Brian signed. The retraction went live the next morning. Short, legal, begrudging, but effective. I previously posted incomplete and misleading information regarding a family dispute. My father-in-law has provided significant financial support to my family over the years. I regret my statements and am working to resolve this privately. No emotion, no drama, just truth. Finally acknowledged. The internet moved on within hours. It always does. The silence afterward felt strange. Not empty, peaceful. I spent that afternoon doing something simple. I planted a small tree near the edge of the property. A coastal oak. Something that would outlive this entire mess. As I packed soil around its base, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Brian. Not at Jessica. Not even at myself. I felt clear. Clear about what I would no longer tolerate. Clear about what generosity meant and what it didn't. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the deck, Emily's photo beside me. I think I did okay. I said aloud. The ocean answered with steady rhythm. And for the first time since I bought the villa, it truly felt like home. But endings are rarely clean. And I knew, deep down, there was one more reckoning left. Not with Brian, with myself. And that realization marked the beginning of the final chapter. Peace has a strange echo when it finally arrives. At first, it feels temporary, like something you're borrowing rather than something you own. I kept waiting for another call, another post, another knock at the door that would drag everything back into chaos. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing happened. Brian kept his distance. The payments began exactly when the agreement said they would. Not $1 more, not $1 less. Automatic, silent, clinical, no messages attached. No apologies wrapped around them. Just numbers moving from one account to another, stripped of emotion. Jessica vanished from my orbit entirely. Her social media presence softened overnight. Less luxury. Fewer captions. More quotes about healing and boundaries. I noticed a careful vagueness. The way she spoke about lessons without naming causes. She was rebuilding her image. Brick by brick. The way people do when they realize the old one collapsed too publicly to salvage. I didn't follow her. I didn't block her either. Indifference felt cleaner than either option. The world, meanwhile, adjusted. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact before now nodded again. A few stopped to talk. Not about Brian. Not directly, but about weather, tides, the new cafe down the road. Normal conversation. Normal respect. It amazed me how quickly perception corrected itself once the noise stopped. Reputation, I learned, isn't restored through argument. It returns quietly when lies lose oxygen. One afternoon, Howard called. Just checking in, he said. No further filings. No violations. Looks like compliance. Good, I replied. He hesitated. How are you holding up? I looked out at the ocean before answering. I'm learning who I am without being needed, I said. Howard laughed softly. That's a bigger adjustment than court ever is. He wasn't wrong. For decades, my value had been measured by usefulness. How quickly I solved problems. How reliably I wrote checks. How little I complained. When that stopped, I had to sit with myself in a way I never had before. At first, the quiet felt like loss. Then it felt like space. I started doing small things differently. I stopped answering my phone immediately. I let invitations sit for a day before responding. I said no without explaining. And nothing collapsed. In fact, something unexpected happened. People began asking instead of assuming. My nephew David came by one weekend. Just him. No entourage. He arrived exactly when he said he would, and brought food without being told. This place is incredible, he said, standing on the deck. Thanks for having me. The words landed gently. You're welcome, I replied. We talked about his work, his plans, the city he was thinking of moving to. Not once did he ask for anything. Not money. Not favors. Just conversation. When he left, he hugged me. Let me know if you ever need help with anything, he said. I smiled. That was the difference. An offer, not an expectation. As summer deepened, I settled into routines that felt earned. Morning walks. Coffee on the deck. Evenings reading without interruption. I started cooking again. Slow meals that took time and rewarded patience. I invited a few friends over. People who asked first. People who left when it was time. I didn't tell stories about Brian. I didn't need to. One evening, months later, my phone rang. Brian's name. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Hello," I said. His voice sounded different, thinner, quieter. "I just want to tell you," he said, "the payments will continue as scheduled. I won't be late." "All right," I replied. Another pause. "And I'm not asking for anything," he added quickly. "I just thought you should know." "I know," I said. Silence stretched between us. "I'm starting over," he said finally. "Different job. Smaller place. I hope it works out," I replied. And I meant it. He hesitated. I was wrong. I didn't respond right away. "I know," I said eventually. He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for months. "I won't contact you again unless you want me to," he said. "That's the best," I replied. When the call ended, I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but an ending that didn't bleed. That night, I sat with Emily's photo and spoke honestly. I couldn't save him, I said, but I stopped him from taking more. The ocean answered the way it always did. Steady, unjudging. Time did what it always does when left alone. It dulled the sharp edges. The story faded from conversation. Brian became a cautionary tale whispered occasionally, then not at all. Jessica's name stopped appearing. Life returned to scale. But something inside me had shifted permanently. I no longer confused love with sacrifice. I no longer believed patience required self-erasure. I understood now that generosity without boundaries isn't kindness. It's permission. And permission, once given freely, is rarely respected. Late one afternoon, as I watched the sun slip toward the horizon, I realized something else. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies. Not for recognition. Not for things to go back to how they were. Because this quiet, solid life was better. I had built it twice. Once with money and effort, and once with resolve. The second build was stronger, and as the light faded over the water, I knew the final part of this story wasn't about Brian at all. It was about what I would never give away again. The ocean has a way of reminding you how small your grudges really are. Weeks passed, then months, and the villa stopped feeling like a battlefield. The silence no longer felt tense or fragile. It settled in naturally, like a long exhale after years of holding your breath. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. I stopped bracing myself every time a car slowed near the driveway. Life didn't rush back all at once. It returned in pieces. Morning light became something I looked forward to again. I developed rituals that had nothing to do with obligation. Coffee at sunrise. A walk along the private stretch of beach when the sand was still cool and unmarked. Reading books I bought years ago but never opened because there had always been something more important to handle for someone else. I realized how much of my identity had been built around being needed. Not loved, needed. There's a difference you don't recognize until the need disappears. People who need you resent boundaries. People who love you respect them. That truth settled into me slowly. One afternoon, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched since moving in. Inside were old letters, birthday cards, holiday notes, drawings Emily had made when she was younger. I sat at the dining table and read them one by one. She'd always written the same thing at the end. "Take care of yourself too, Dad." I hadn't listened, but I was listening now. The settlement payments continued without incident. I never checked them obsessively. I let my accountant handle it. Money no longer felt like leverage or loss. It felt neutral again, the way it should. Useful, but not defining. What surprised me most was how my relationships changed once I stopped overgiving. Some people disappeared completely. Others adjusted. A few, very few, grew closer. David came by again, this time with his wife. They stayed 2 nights. They asked which room was okay. They cleaned up after themselves. On the second evening, his wife helped me cook dinner without being asked. "This place feels calm," she said, "like it's meant to be lived in, not shown off." I smiled. That night, after they left, I didn't feel drained. I felt full. That had never happened before. Autumn arrived quietly. The air cooled. The crowds thinned. The ocean changed color, darker and deeper, less decorative, more honest. One evening, I received an email, not from Brian, not from Jessica, but from someone unexpected. Margaret, Emily's friend. She wrote carefully, "Richard, I owe you an apology. I believed the story before I understood the truth. I let emotion override facts, and I failed you. I see now what you were carrying alone for years. Emily would not have wanted that. I hope one day you can forgive me." I didn't respond right away. Forgiveness isn't a transaction. It's a decision that comes when you're ready. A week later, I wrote back, "Thank you for saying this. I don't hold anger anymore. I just hold clarity. I hope you're well." That was enough. I didn't need apologies to validate me anymore. My life no longer depended on other people understanding my side. Winter brought storms, the kind that rattled windows and reminded you how strong a house really is. I sat inside, warm and dry, listening to the wind tear across the water, and thought about the difference between shelters built on trust and those built on entitlement. Brian's life, from what I heard through distant channels, was smaller now, not ruined, just reduced to what he could actually sustain. A modest apartment, a regular job, fewer people around him. No one calling him generous anymore. No one calling him a victim either. He existed quietly. And oddly enough, that was the most honest version of him I'd ever known. One evening, months later, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, a letter. Brian's handwriting was unmistakable. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't explain himself. He didn't blame anyone. He wrote, "I spent years thinking strength meant taking what I could. I know now it just meant I was afraid of standing on my own. I don't expect anything from you. I just needed you to know I understand what I lost." I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Understanding doesn't erase damage, but it ends a cycle. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That chapter was closed. The villa changed with the seasons, and so did I. I stopped measuring my worth by endurance. I stopped confusing peace with loneliness. I learned that silence can be a gift when it's chosen, not imposed. And one night, as I stood on the deck watching moonlight ripple across the water, I realized something quietly profound. I hadn't won. I had reclaimed my time, my space, my voice, my dignity. Things I never should have had to fight for. The ocean didn't care about family drama or social media or settlements. It simply existed. And for the first time in a very long time, so did I, without apology. Spring returned with soft mornings and longer days. The kind of season that invites you back into the world gently, without demand. I hosted a small dinner one evening. 6 people, chosen carefully. No surprises. No expectations. Just conversation, laughter, and respect. When the night ended, everyone thanked me, not out of habit, but sincerely. After the door closed behind the last guest, I stood in the quiet kitchen and realized something important. I wasn't relieved they were gone. I was simply content they had been there. That difference mattered. Time reshapes pain if you let it, not by erasing it, but by shrinking it until it no longer controls a room. I thought often about the man I'd been before all this happened. The man who believed peace came from compliance. The man who mistook generosity for obligation. The man who stayed quiet not out of wisdom, but fear of conflict. I didn't judge him. He did what he knew how to do at the time. But I was no longer him. The villa had become more than a house. It was a boundary made of stone and glass. A reminder that sanctuary is something you must protect deliberately. One morning, I took down Emily's photo from a mantle and moved it to my bedroom. Not because I wanted her closer, but because I no longer needed her memory to justify my choices. She wasn't a reason to endure pain. She was a reason to live honestly. On the anniversary of her passing, I went to the beach alone. I didn't bring flowers. I didn't speak out loud. I just stood there and let the wind move through me. Grief no longer felt like punishment. It felt like love that had learned to rest. Later that evening, I opened the last bottle of wine I'd saved for something special. I realized this was it. Not a celebration. Not a milestone. Just a quiet moment where nothing was being taken from me. And that was enough. I sometimes wonder what Brian tells himself now, whether he frames a story as loss or lesson or injustice. But it no longer concerns me. His story continues elsewhere. Mine continues here. In the sound of waves hitting rock. In the slow creak of the house settling at night. In the calm certainty that I will never again trade my peace for someone else's comfort. That I will never again mistake access for love. That I will never again apologize for protecting what I built. If there's a truth worth leaving behind, it's this. You don't have to be loud to take your life back. You don't have to destroy anyone to reclaim yourself. You don't have to explain boundaries to people who benefit from breaking them. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is close the door, lock it, and finally sit down in the quiet you earned. This house didn't save me. I saved myself inside it. And for the rest of my days, that will be enough. Before you go, if this story meant something to you, take a moment to subscribe, leave a comment about where you're watching from, and share it with someone who might need the reminder that dignity is never too late to reclaim. Thank you for listening.